Your internet doesn't travel through the sky. It travels through something closer to a garden hose, buried under the ocean floor. And one volcano just proved how fragile that is. In January 2022, an underwater volcano near Tonga erupted with the force of hundreds of nuclear weapons. The shockwave was heard in Alaska. It circled the globe twice. But for 100,000 people, the most devastating consequence wasn't the ash or the tsunami. It was silence. Total digital blackout for 5 weeks. Because Tonga had exactly one submarine cable connecting it to the rest of the world, and when that cable snapped, there was no backup plan. This is no geography. And this is the infrastructure story almost nobody tells. Ask most people how the internet crosses oceans, and they'll say satellites. It makes perfect sense. We've seen the dishes, we've watched the launches. Elon Musk is putting thousands of satellites into orbit right now. Of course the internet runs through space. Except it doesn't. Not most of it. Satellites carry a small fraction of global internet traffic, genuinely useful for remote regions, but nowhere near the backbone. The backbone is underwater. Right now, more than 400 active submarine cable systems are woven across the ocean floor. Their combined length exceeds 1.3 million kilometers. That is enough to wrap around the Earth more than 30 times. Every email, every video call, every financial transaction between continents, almost all of it travels through glass fibers thinner than a human hair, running along the bottom of the sea. And most of us have no idea. This isn't new technology. The idea of running a wire under the ocean is older than the telephone. In 1866, engineers successfully laid the first permanent transatlantic telegraph cable, after multiple failed attempts spanning years. For the first time in history, a message could cross the Atlantic in minutes instead of weeks. That cable was about as thick as your wrist, heavy, fragile, and expensive. But it worked. For over a century, telegraph and telephone cables followed the same basic principle: copper wire, insulation, armor, ocean floor. Then, in 1988, everything changed. TAT-8, the first transatlantic fiber optic cable, went live. Instead of electrical signals through copper, it sent pulses of light through glass. The capacity jump was staggering. A single fiber optic strand can carry more information than thousands of copper wires combined. Today's cables don't carry one fiber. They carry dozens, bundled together, each pair capable of transmitting terabits of data every second. And this is where the garden hose comparison becomes real. In deep water, thousands of meters below the surface, a submarine cable is roughly the diameter of a garden hose. There's no need for heavy armor down there. Nothing is going to cut it. The pressure alone keeps it in place. But in shallow coastal waters, the story is completely different. Near shore, cables are armored to wrist thickness, protected against anchors, fishing trawlers, and the sheer violence of the coastal environment. The same cable that crosses the deepest ocean as a garden hose arrives on your coastline as something closer to a steel pipe. Laying a submarine cable is one of the most logistically complex operations on the planet. A single cable ship can carry thousands of kilometers of cable in its hold. The ship moves slowly across the ocean, paying out cable at a carefully calculated rate, accounting for seafloor terrain, ocean currents, and the weight of the cable itself. The route matters enormously. Cable planners avoid earthquake zones, undersea volcanic activity, and areas where fishing fleets work. They also avoid, where possible, the same shipping corridors used by anchors. But avoidance has limits. Some geographic choke points are unavoidable. The Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca, the waters around Singapore. These are places where dozens of cables converge because the geometry of continents forces them to. In the Strait of Malacca and the Singapore Strait, two of the world's narrowest and busiest passages, cables converge with some of the heaviest shipping traffic on Earth. These two waterways feed into each other, and together they form one of the most concentrated cable corridors on the planet. When something goes wrong in this corridor, it doesn't affect one connection. It affects dozens. And things do go wrong. Anchors, fishing trawlers, earthquakes, undersea landslides, volcanic eruptions. Researchers estimate that submarine cables suffer over 100 faults per year globally. Most are repaired within days or weeks by specialized cable ships equipped with grappling equipment and underwater splicing tools. Most. On January 15, 2022, the Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai submarine volcano erupted. It was one of the most powerful volcanic events recorded in the modern era. The pressure wave circled the Earth twice and was detectable on instruments worldwide. The eruption sent a tsunami across the Pacific. It generated a shockwave heard in Alaska, and it severed Tonga's only submarine cable. One cable, 100,000 people. 5 weeks without global internet. Emergency satellite connections provided a trickle of bandwidth, enough for critical government communications and aid coordination. But the capacity was a fraction of what the cable had carried. Think of it this way. The cable was a highway. The emergency satellite link was a garden path. For ordinary people, there was nothing. No video calls to family overseas. No access to international banking systems. No way to verify whether loved ones in remote villages were safe. The cable repair ship had to travel from Papua New Guinea, and when the repair team arrived, they discovered the damage was far more extensive than a simple cut. The volcanic activity had buried sections of cable under meters of ash and debris. The sea floor itself had changed shape. Engineers weren't just splicing a broken wire, they were excavating through a newly formed volcanic landscape on the bottom of the ocean. The repair took 5 weeks. And when connectivity finally returned, Tonga's underlying situation hadn't changed at all. It still had one cable, no redundancy. The same single point of failure it had before the eruption. Tonga is not unique. It is an extreme example of a problem that affects dozens of nations. Island nations across the Pacific, the Caribbean, and the Indian Ocean depend on 1 or 2 cables for all international connectivity. A single cut from an anchor, an earthquake, a landslide can isolate them completely. But the vulnerability isn't just about small islands. Cable incidents in East Africa have repeatedly disrupted regional connectivity across multiple countries. The structural reality those incidents revealed is not in dispute. Concentrated cable corridors create concentrated risk. When a single cable system serving an entire coastline is severed, whether by a ship's anchor, a submarine landslide, or seismic activity, the countries depending on it have no fallback. When cables converge in the same narrow passage, a single event can cascade across an entire region. And the passages that cables are forced to share are the same passages that ships have always used. The 2021 Ever Given grounding in the Suez Canal blocked the canal for 6 days. It disrupted shipping on a scale that made global headlines. But it also highlighted something most coverage missed. The submarine cables running through the same corridor had no alternative routing. If that grounding had damaged the cables instead of just the shipping lane, the consequences would have been far harder to repair than a refloated container ship. Geography is not neutral. The shape of the continents forces cables into the same narrow passages that ships have always used. That's not a design flaw, it's geometry. And it means you cannot solve the choke point problem simply by building better cables. You have to build different routes entirely, which costs more, takes longer, and often crosses territory that no single company wants to pay for alone. And then there's the question of who owns these cables. Submarine cables are privately owned, mostly by telecommunications consortia, and, increasingly, by major technology companies building their own dedicated systems. The security implications of who owns, monitors, and can physically access these cables are actively debated by governments and researchers. We don't fully know how resilient this system is to deliberate interference. Much of what governments know remains classified. What we do know is that the architecture was not designed with resilience as the primary goal. It was designed for efficiency, for cost, for speed of deployment. Resilience came second, and sometimes it takes a disaster to change that. After the 2011 Tohoku earthquake disrupted Japanese cable infrastructure, engineers redesigned routing around the country, adding redundant paths connecting Tokyo, Shanghai, and Southeast Asia. That kind of redesign is possible, but historically, it requires a crisis to trigger it. Tonga got its crisis. It still has one cable. The internet feels like a cloud, invisible, everywhere, resilient by design, but it runs through glass fibers on the ocean floor, passing through geographic choke points that no algorithm can reroute around. The distributed network that engineers originally imagined meets the very undistributed reality of ocean geography. The internet was designed to survive a nuclear war. It was not designed to survive a single volcano in the South Pacific with a better plan than wait for the repair ship. Tonga didn't fail because of bad engineering. It failed because geography is real, redundancy is expensive, and 100,000 people don't generate enough traffic to justify a second cable. That calculation hasn't changed. This infrastructure reminds us that the most important systems in modern life are often the ones we never see, and that invisibility is easily mistaken for invulnerability. A garden hose on the ocean floor carries the weight of the modern world. And in dozens of places, there is only one of them. But one severed cable in the South Pacific leaves a harder question open. How many other nations are one eruption, one anchor, one earthquake away from the same 5 weeks of silence? I'm here to help you know the systems that hold the modern world together. Which matters more to you right now? The cable routes we've already built, or the redundant routes we haven't? See you at the next cable landing.